Bonjour, salut, bienvenue to another French lesson with Anna. And today we're going to look at one of the forms we have to express verbs in the past. It's the simple past tense, but not the passé simple. In French, the passé simple is for literature. We'll look at that one later on. This is the past tense we use on our day-to-day routine, and it's called le passé composé. Le passé composé is the past tense. It's called composé because, as you will see, it's made up of two parts. It's got two verbs to help each other sort of formulate the idea. And we're going to be looking at the regular verbs and at the irregular verbs as well. So let's get started, okay? Le passé composé, en français, it follows a very simple rule, okay? You need a helper, which we call auxiliaire, and this helper will be in the present tense. The helper in French is either avoir or être, okay? In English, we sort of have that idea with the verb to do when we want to emphasize something, where we say, I did do something. And in the negative form, we actually need that helper to say, I didn't do something, right? So think of it sort of the same way in French, but for French, we must have them no matter what, okay? So we have this helper in the present tense, followed by the main verb, which changes to the past participle, participe passé. And we're going to see what that means, okay? So keep in mind the two formulas. There are specific verbs that follow the avoir formula and that follow the être formula. So for avoir, we conjugate the verb avoir in the present tense, and it is followed by the participe passé. If it's the verb être, okay, in the present tense as well, it is also followed by the participe passé, but it has one extra element, which is called les accords. What that means is agreements. And we will have to agree this verb as if it were an adjective with the subject. We'll see what that means, okay? If you forgot the verb être, okay, is je suis. We're going to look at the avoir as well in the present tense. So je suis, tu es, il, elle, on est. Don't pronounce the ST. Nous sommes, vous êtes. So we do that liaison. Vous êtes. And over here we also say ils sont, elles sont. We don't pronounce the T. Okay? So that to review, that's the verb être. And here's the verb avoir. J'ai, tu as, il a, elle a, on a. Remember, we have to do the liaison. Nous avons becomes nous avons, vous avez, ils ont, elles ont. So if you forgot these, you can check the video on the present tense where I explain where all these verbs come from, because they are irregular verbs in the present tense, okay? You know them in the present, you already know one part of the passé composé. So how are we going to work with these guys? Le participe passé, which is the past participle of regular verbs, in French is quite simple. ER verbs change to, we drop the ER and we change it to E, accent aigu. With this accent aigu means it goes from the left to the right. If it's an RE verb, we drop the RE, we replace it with U. And if it's an IR verb, we drop the R and we just leave the I by itself. In English, the past participle is usually expressed with ED, worked, for example. But then, just like in English, in French, we also have some that don't follow that rule. So, for example, in English, the past participle of be is going to be been, right? Do, done. Well, in French, some of the verbs also have their own past participle and do not follow this rule we just saw. Those verbs are, among them, are avoir, which changes to eu. Être, if you know the word for summer, you know the past participle of être, été, okay? To be. The verb faire, to do or to make, becomes fait, F-A-I-T. The verb vouloir, to want, becomes voulu, okay? It ends with that U. There's more of these guys. The verb devoir, to have to, becomes du, but be careful. You need to put this accent circonflexe, this accent that looks like a hat. It doesn't change the way you pronounce the word with or without it. The difference is when I'm reading it, du without the accent isn't a preposition, which means from or of. And in order to distinguish between the preposition du and the verb, the past participle of devoir, du, the verb takes this accent circonflexe. It won't change the way we pronounce the word, but it's telling me it's the verb instead of the preposition, okay? Pouvoir, to be able to, changes to pu. It doesn't need an accent because there's no preposition that is pu, okay? Savoir, to know something, becomes su. Connaître, to know someone, to know a place, etc., becomes connu. Okay, so both savoir and connaître mean to know, but they are different. Savoir is more about knowledge. Connaître is about more knowing someone, knowing a place. There is a video on these two verbs. You can check it out to see the difference and exactly how we use them. Vivre, to live, changes to vécu. Okay, so that that E has an accent aigu. Don't forget it. Okay, without it, it's wrong. Then recevoir, to receive, becomes reçu. There's a reason why I put these two together. Students have a tendency of mixing them up and getting really confused. Vivre does not have the C, does not have a CD. We actually pronounce it as a Q. So vécu, and we open the E. Recevoir is the opposite. The E is a silent one. It's re, but it's not recu, it's reçu. And that's why that CD is there. Every time you need the letter C to sound like S, like se, if it's before an A, an O, or a U, you must put a CD. You don't need it before the E. You don't need it before the I. That's why over here, recevoir has no CD. But you need it before A, O, U, if it's to be pronounced as a se. Okay, so reçu. Dire, to say, to tell someone. Sometimes it becomes dit, and lire, to read, becomes lu. Notice that there are a lot of them that end in U, even though they sort of change. They're irregular because they don't follow any rules. So now let's go back to the regular verbs and how we conjugate them, how we use them in French. And we can do this the way we normally do with the other tenses, by looking at each group. So the first group is the one that ends in ER. And I chose the verb regarder, just like I could have chosen parler, marcher, any other verb, okay? So regarder means to watch. It's an ER verb, so the first thing that you need to remember is that you're going to drop this ending and you're going to replace it with e accent aigu, this E with an accent, right? That will be my participe passé. And this verb is conjugated with avoir. We will see which ones take être in a minute, okay? It's a handful of them. So, regarder needs the helper avoir, and then the participe passé becomes E with that accent aigu because it's an ER verb. Now, how do we conjugate this guy? Well, the verb avoir needs to be in the present tense. So, there are always three parts to conjugate a verb in the passé composé affirmatif, right? We're not looking at the negative form. So it's the subject pronoun, the verb avoir, which is the helper conjugated in the present tense, and the main verb, whatever it is that you are expressing, in the participe passé. Okay, so yesterday I watched something, right? J'ai regardé. So there's my avoir in the present, there's my e accent aigu. Notice that the participe passé does not change at all. It's the same. It keeps consistent throughout, okay, for every single subject pronoun you have there. Tu as regardé. You watched. Il a regardé. He watched. Elle a regardé. Elle is she, right? She watched. On a regardé. We watched. Informal. The nous. Now, don't forget here the liaison. Nous avons regardé. We watched. Vous avez regardé. Ils ont regardé. Elles ont regardé. Vous avez regardé, you watched. And then ils ont regardé, they, masculine form, watched. And elles ont regardé, they, feminine form, watched. And that takes care of the verbs from the first group. Now let's look at the second group, okay? And the second group ends in re. And I have the verb répondre, to answer, okay? To respond, to answer. And the verb répondre takes avoir, that's the first formula, plus the participe passé. And because it's an re verb, we replace that ending re with a u, because re verbs that are regular follow that rule. They change to u. And they are common throughout. We don't have to worry about the je, tu, il, because it's the same thing for every single one of them. Just like it's the same with the verb avoir, just conjugated in the present tense. So, j'ai répondu, I answered. Okay, tu as répondu, you answered. Il a répondu, he answered. Elle a répondu, she answered. And on a, so we're going to do the liaison here, on a répondu, we answered, remember, informal. Nous avons, we do the liaison over here, so nous avons répondu, we answered. Do the same thing here, the liaison. Vous avez répondu, you answered. Ils, same thing here. Ils ont répondu, they, masculine form, answered. And elles ont répondu, they, feminine form, answered. And then, again, re verbs, if they are regular, follow this pattern. Every single one of them. Répondre, attendre, vendre, entendre. All of these guys will be the same. Okay? Now let's look at the third one. Okay? The third group is the group that ends in IR. And I chose the verb choisir, to choose. It is an avoir verb, okay? And so because if it's IR, we get rid of that R and we keep the I. It's going to be the same throughout. Notice that it's always the same pattern. It's not that difficult. So, j'ai choisi, I chose. Tu as choisi. Il a choisi. Elle a choisi. On a choisi. Nous avons choisi. Vous avez choisi. Ils ont choisi. Elles ont choisi. Okay? So I chose, you chose, he chose, she chose. On and nous, they both mean we chose, you chose, they, masculine form, chose, and they, feminine form, chose. So that takes care of regular verbs that take avoir as well, okay? So next we're going to look at some of the irregular verbs that take avoir. And avoir takes itself as a helper, okay? What does that mean? It means that the verb avoir by itself means to have. In order to say had, I had, you had, he had, you need the verb avoir in the present tense, and you need the verb avoir to change into the past participle, okay? Which becomes e. Why? Because we saw it before. It's part of that list of irregular verbs. Don't forget, an irregular verb is a verb that is not capable of following the rule that has been established, okay? So the rule that was established was that an IR verb, you drop the R, you leave the I. Avoir is not avoir, okay? That doesn't exist, so it changed to e, and that's what makes it irregular. It doesn't follow the rule, okay? So, takes itself as a helper and then changes to e. And this is what it looks like. J'ai eu, okay? J'ai eu, I had. Tu as eu, okay? You had. Il a eu, he had. Elle a eu, she had. On a eu, we had. Nous avons eu, we had. Vous avez eu, you had. Ils ont eu, okay, so ils ont eu, they masculine form had, and elles ont eu, they feminine form had, okay? So that's how the verb avoir in the past tense looks like. Another one, être. So even though être is used in the Passé Composé as a helper, when it is the main verb, which means to be, it actually needs the verb avoir in order to be formed. Okay, so it takes avoir as a helper, and then it changes the past participle into that word that looks like summer. Été. Okay, been in English, but the idea here when we combine it is not I had been, but it's more I was. Okay, so that's how it looks like. J'ai été, I was. Tu as été, you were. Notice how in English it's also an irregular verb. I was, you were, he and she was, etc. Okay, so il a été, he was. Elle a été, she was. On a été, we were. Nous avons été, we were again. Vous avez été, you were. Ils ont été, that means they, masculine form, were. Elles ont été, plural form of feminine, they. Okay, elles ont été. Again, verb avoir in the present tense, change the verb être to été, participe passé. Okay, one more. Recevoir. You can see the pattern. So that list of irregular verbs I gave you, that's what you're going to have to do for all of them. And the best way to do this, that I always tell students to do, is to, it might be boring, but it's the best way to learn, write them down one by one, conjugate them over and over again. That's how you remember them, okay? So the verb recevoir, again, it's an IR verb. It doesn't follow the rule of IR. It changes to reçu, as we saw, and it's also an avoir verb, okay? So I received, you received, he received. This is what it looks like. Okay? J'ai reçu. Tu as reçu. You received. Il a reçu. Elle a reçu. On a reçu. Nous avons reçu. Vous avez reçu. Ils ont reçu. Elles ont reçu. Okay? Doesn't change. Reçu throughout. That's one of the easy things about it. Are we getting this? It's not that hard. Now let's move to the verbs that instead of avoir need être as a helper. And like I said, it's a handful of them. We can actually divide them into two groups. So if you need the helper être, follow this formula. Okay, it looks like a math formula. Those of you who are mathematicians, maybe this makes a lot of sense to you. Sujet, subject. So it can be a noun or it can be a subject pronoun. Je, tu, il, elle, etc. Then you need the helper être in the present tense, as we saw before. Then you need the verb, the main verb, in the participe passé, as we have been seeing with the avoir ones. And then something that we don't need for now with avoir, but we definitely need with être, is the accord, which are agreements. What does this mean? It means that if a verb takes être as a helper, you need to look at the subject, okay? And you're gonna have to do agreements with the subject. You're going to show over here with this verb at the participe passé, you're going to tell me if it's masculine, feminine, singular, or plural. And that's what the bottom line here is, and we're gonna get there very soon. So, as I said, il y a deux groupes de verbes qui prennent l'auxiliaire être. So there are two groups of verbs that take être, only two. So the easy way to know this is memorize the être verbs, and everything else takes avoir. It's kind of impossible to remember all the avoir verbs because there are so many, and basically all of them outside this list, okay? So you get to know, memorize the list for être, and if the verb does not belong to one of these two lists, then it's always avoir. It's one of the easiest ways to remember, okay? The first group is known in North America, especially here in Canada, as Dr. Mrs. Van de Tramp. It's also referred to as la maison du verbe être, okay? The house of the verb être. Whatever you want to use, it's the same thing, whether you choose to use the maison du verbe être or Dr. Mrs. Van de Tramp, you're talking about the same verbs. For the purpose of this video, it's easier to have Dr. and Mrs. Van de Tramp, but again, you can always look up La Maison du Verbe Être. And we're going to see what this stands for, okay? So each one of these letters is a verb. The second group is les verbes réfléchis et pronominaux. okay? I did a video on these verbs in the present tense, okay? These are the verbs that express an action that is done by me and falls on me, okay? So it's the one-self action, such as je me lave, I am washing myself. I'm taking a shower, for example. I wake up, it's me. I'm the one doing the waking up. I'm getting up, it's also me. I'm doing the action, and the action is sort of falling on me. So if you want to know more about those verbs, reflexive verbs, you can check the video on le présent des verbes réfléchis. Now we're going to look at how we form them in the past tense, okay? And they are the second group that take être. The pronominaux just means that with the verb réfléchi, we also have a group that is réciproque, reciprocal, but because they're conjugated the same way, for now we're going to just focus on these. Now let's get to the accord, the agreements. So if your subject is masculine singular, rien, on n'ajoute rien. So that means we do not add anything. Just leave the participe passé, this guy over here, as is. If your subject is feminine singular, such as elle, right, you must add an e at the end of the participe passé. If you're not sure if it's masculine or feminine, but it is singular, you put an e in brackets because the brackets indicates that the subject can be either masculine or feminine. If it's masculine plural, add an s. If it's feminine plural, add es. If you're not sure again of what it is, then put the e in brackets, just like you did for the singular form, and add an s. Okay? So that's the rule. Masculine singular, nothing. Feminine singular, e. Not sure if it's masculine or feminine, but it's singular, put an e in brackets. Masculine plural, s. Feminine plural, es. Not sure if it's masculine or feminine, but you know it's plural, e in brackets, s. How then do we conjugate this? How does it look like? Well, let's look at the first group. Dr. Mrs. Van de Tramp, or like I said, la maison du verbe être. The reason why it's also called la maison du verbe être, it's because these verbs indicate some physical aspect that the person is doing, right? Going up, coming down, falling, getting up. So all of these things require some sort of physical aspect to it, and that's why they can be placed inside a house, and that's called, or outside, and it's called la maison du verbe être. So here, let's go with Dr. Mrs. Van de Tramp, okay? Devenir, to become. And devenir, notice I put here a little star, an asterisk. The ones with it means they are irregular. And there are only 5 of them in this list, okay? On this list here. So, devenu, devenir, devenu. Notice that devenir and revenir share the same verb, which is the verb venir. So if venir, which is down here actually, if it changes to venu, devenu, and revenir will be revenu. That's that simple. That's how you can group them together, okay? Monter, to climb or to go up, it's a regular verb. So er changes to e accent aigu. Rester, be careful with this guy. It does not mean to rest. It means to stay, okay? Relaxer is you're to rest, okay? So rester means to stay. It's a regular verb. Changes to e accent aigu. Sortir is to go out. Then it's a regular verb, stays as an I. Drop the R. Sorti. Venir, as we saw up here with devenir and revenir, to come, venir is irregular, becomes venu. Aller, in the past is actually regular. Okay, it's an ER verb, changes to E accent aigu. Aller. Naître, to be born, is an irregular verb. Okay, even though it ends in RE, we don't say naîtu, it becomes né. Okay, so that's one of the irregular verbs. Descendre, to go down. Okay, that's a regular verb. RE becomes descendu. Entrer, to enter. ER becomes entrer, accent aigu. Retourner, to return, to get back. It's a regular verb, so retourner, accent aigu. Tomber, to fall. It's also regular, so accent aigu. Rentrer, like entrer. If entrer is that, then rentrer is going to be rentrer. Okay, nothing changes to re-enter, to come back. Arriver, to arrive, changes to e accent aigu because it is regular. Mourir, to die. This is the fifth one that is irregular. It's not mourir, okay, or moru, as sometimes we see. Moru means caught fish, okay, so don't change it to that. Mourir becomes mort, okay, M-O-R-T. And partir, to leave or to go away. Partir because it's a regular verb. So this is group number 1. All these verbs take être. Then the reflexive, every verb that has a se at the beginning. Se laver, se doucher, se réveiller, se raser, any se, okay? That's it. Outside that group, you have avoir, okay? So how do we conjugate verbs from Dr. and Mrs. Van de Tramp list, okay? Let's look at aller, for example, the verb to go. If I want to say I went, this is how you conjugate it. You take the verb être in the present tense. Notice that until now, we were doing avoir. Now we switch to être. The format is the same. Only the auxiliary changed, okay? So, je suis, and then you have aller, because it's an ER verb. The participe passé changes to e accent aigu. Now, because the auxiliary is the verb être, you need to look at the je. You need to look at the subject. There's nothing here, there's no context here that indicates for sure that the je is masculine or feminine. I'm not sure. So we follow the rule. We put the e in brackets. This indicates that the je could be referring to a feminine or a masculine subject. Okay? So je suis, and then aller. But notice that there's an S here with a vowel, so what are we going to do? Je suis allé. Tu es allé. Here we actually don't do the liaison. So tu es allé. Same thing. Look at the tu. No context given, so I don't know if it's masculine or feminine. Then put the e in brackets. Now, il over here, this subject pronoun means masculine, he, right? So I know for sure it's a masculine singular. Add nothing to aller. Il est allé. Il est allé. Okay, so with the t here we pronounce it, the liaison. Il est allé. No e, no in brackets, because I know the context here is quite clear. Okay, same thing with the next one, elle. Elle means she, so it's the feminine singular pronoun here. In that case, I put an e. I don't do it in brackets because I know it is feminine. So add an extra e. One doesn't replace the other. Okay, so you have e with accent, which is the ending of the verb, aller, and then you add an extra e, no accent, which indicates feminine. Elle est allée. On is always neutral, so it's treated as a masculine singular. So on est allé, nothing over here. Now, moving on to the plural forms. Nous sommes allés. Okay, so nous sommes allés. There's my liaison there. Again, I don't know if this nous is masculine or feminine, so I need to put an e in brackets. But I do know it's plural, so add an s. Vous êtes, so you do the liaison there. Vous êtes allés. I don't know who this vous is. I'm going to put it in e. I know it's plural. I'm putting an s. Now, with vous, I didn't include it here, but it is possible to see the s in brackets. And the reason for that is very simple. If you are talking to someone where you want to use the formal, the respectful, the polite form of tu, right? Remember, someone older than you or someone you don't know very well, place of authority, etc. You do not in French treat that person as a tu. Tu is for friends, okay? People who know each other quite well, very close to each other. So you always use the vous form. In that case, if you're just talking to one person and you are using vous, then don't put the e and don't put the s. And unless the vous is feminine, then you're going to put the e. That's the reason why in some cases you see e in brackets and s in brackets. It's referring to the vous form being used as a singular form, okay, in the formal context. Otherwise, the S doesn't need the brackets. Then you have here, I've divided them because it's important. Ils, right? We don't pronounce that S, but il, the plural form. Ils sont allés. Now this il is they masculine. This is the masculine plural form of they. So if it's the masculine plural form, I know what it is, add an S. Okay? Ils sont allés. And then elles sont allées, right? So they, but this is feminine plural. So add an I, because I know it's feminine, add an I for feminine, and add an S to make a plural. Elles sont allées. They went. I chose a verb from the Dr. and Mrs. Van de Tramp. There are 5 that are irregular, so I chose one of them. And it's the one that, as I said, has a tendency for some reason of showing up sometimes as moru. And that's the one I don't want you to really get wrong. It changes to mort. The participe passé becomes mort. And then you follow the same formula, okay? Être in the present, participe passé, agreements. So, je suis mort, okay? I died. Je suis mort. The je, I'm not sure what that is, so put the E in bracket. Now, it's important to know one thing. If you are pronouncing the feminine form, you're going to pronounce the T. It's morte. If you are pronouncing the masculine form, the T is silent. It becomes mort. Okay? So, je suis mort or je suis morte. Then, tu es mort. Again, not sure about this context here, if it's masculine or feminine. The E is in brackets. Okay? So, tu es mort or tu es morte. The next one I do know. It's il, he. Right? So, il est mort. Add nothing. I also know elle. Elle is she. So, elle est morte. Pronounce that T now. Elle est morte. That's what distinguishes the masculine from the feminine, okay? Add an E, elle est morte. And if you remember from before, I said on is always neutral, always masculine singular, so on est mort, okay? Nous sommes morts. I don't know who the nous is when it comes to masculine or feminine, but the E in brackets, add an S to make a plural. Vous êtes, so you do the liaison, vous êtes, right? Vous êtes mort. I don't know the vous for masculine or feminine. E in brackets, add an S, or you may put the S in brackets again. Ils sont morts. Here I am sure about, right? So it's they masculine, so add an S. Elles sont mortes, okay? I know that elle is feminine, so add an E, and I know it's plural, add an S. Elles sont mortes. Ils sont morts. Elles sont mortes. Okay? And that is really the Dr. Mrs. Van de Tramp group. Looking at the second group, it's the same thing. There's only one extra word there, which is the réfléchi, the reflexive verbs. Okay? Like I said, any verb that has a se in front of it is considered des verbes pronominaux, des verbes réfléchis, réciproques, so it has all these names. So for now, let's go into réfléchi. And se laver. So the verb laver by itself means to wash. Se laver means to wash oneself. Okay, so now we're looking at the oneself idea. Nothing changes other than the fact that you are adding the pronoun réfléchi, se. And you're changing it to myself, yourself, himself. Like I said, check the video on reflexive verbs. But the verb itself, just like any other verb, right? So laver happens to be regular, ends in er, change it to accent aigu. All right? Now, the se is a reflexive pronoun. You need to change it, okay, to myself, yourself, himself, herself, etc. So, je me, that means myself. Je me suis lavé. So the order of reflexive verbs is subject, followed by the reflexive pronoun, followed by the helper, l'auxiliaire être, followed by le participe passé, followed by the agreement, les accords. Okay? Same thing. Okay? Nothing really changed. We're just adding between the subject pronoun and the helper another pronoun. Okay? So, je me suis lavé. I don't know who this je is. You're going to put the E in brackets. I washed myself. Okay? Then tu, te, et. But because the te is a silent E and e starts with a vowel, we drop that E and we put an apostrophe. Tu t'es lavé. Okay? I don't know who this tu is. I put an E in brackets. tu t'es lavé. Il, se, so for il and elle and on, the se doesn't change. Again, because there's a vowel here, we drop the E and we put an apostrophe. Il s'est lavé. I know it's masculine singular, no agreement. Elle s'est lavée. I know it's feminine singular, so put an agreement. On s'est lavé. On is neutral, leave it as a masculine singular form. Okay? Now, nous, and the reflexive pronoun for nous is also nous, so we double the nous. Nous sommes lavés. I don't know who the nous is, put the in brackets. I know it's plural, add an S. Nous sommes lavés. Vous êtes lavés. But over here, you have the S followed by that vowel. Vous êtes lavés. E in brackets, because I don't know if it's masculine or feminine. S for plural. Again, S in brackets if you want, if it's the formal form. Ils se sont lavés. Now, il over here is plural masculine. It's they, it's the masculine form, just add the S, right? Elle is the feminine form, so you're going to have to add the E for feminine and the S for plural. Ils se sont lavés, they washed themselves, they masculine. Elles se sont lavées, they feminine, washed themselves. Okay? Now, there's one thing you need to pay attention to, which is if the reflexive verb, that's what this means. Si le verbe réfléchi est suivi d'un complément direct, which is un COD, check out the video on these pronouns, COD, COI, I, and on. Okay, so complément d'objet direct means COD. Il n'y a pas d'accord. There is no agreement. What does that mean? If immediately after the verb, over here, there's no preposition, but there is an object, a direct object, which normally refers to body parts. Most of the time, it refers to body parts. Le visage, les mains, le corps, les cheveux, whatever the case may be, right? So, again, if the verb is immediately followed by the direct object, how do I know it's a direct object? Because there's no preposition here. Again, check out the video, okay? Elle s'est lavé les mains. She washed her hands. If you have this scenario, the object, the direct object, cancels the agreement. So even though the subject is feminine, don't add a ni to laver because of this. It's one exception to the rule, okay? So no direct object. If you only had elle s'est lavé, period, you would have to add an e because elle is feminine singular. Elle s'est lavé les mains, she washed her hands. There is that direct object, her hands, then it cancels the agreement, but no agreement. All right. Another thing that is important to remember, which is also something I talk about in another video, is in English we use the possessive when we're talking about the body parts. So I washed my hands, I washed my hair. Not in French, you wash the hands, because the reflexive verb me, te, se, etc. indicates already that they belong to you or to someone else, okay? So if I say je me lave les mains, the me is already saying that it's my own hands. I don't need to repeat my hands. So I wash the hands, I wash the face, even though it's my face. Je me suis, in this case, je me suis lavé le visage, okay? And that's it for the Passé Composé. This is a long lesson. Again, I will have some exercises for you to practice. It requires some time. It does require you going over which verbs take être. Remember those. Everything else is avoir. There are many verbs that are also considered irregular. I'll have a video with some of them, both for, especially for avoir, because we've seen the ones for être. But just keep practicing. It's the best way to do so. Avoir, être in the present, followed by the participe passé. And if it's être, remember that it can have some agreements. Hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, let me know. À la prochaine.